Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 11 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That is Gavin. How you doing, Gavin?
I'm real stressed, Mike.
Would you like to talk about why you're real stressed? Because I mostly know why you're real stressed, but
Is this suddenly a therapy podcast?
I
Because
mean,
we're
it
not
can
qualified for that.
What? I don't know. Speak for yourself. I do therapy just about every day when I'm at school.
Man, teachers are really overworked. That shouldn't be your job.
And yet here we are. So
yeah,
we certainly don't have to make this. Yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, just master's thesis things. So yeah, at the time you're all hearing this, if you are listening to it the day it comes out on Wednesday, I will have gotten a draft of my thesis, not even the whole thing, but a draft of my thesis to my advisor on Monday, the day we are currently recording. So immediately after we're done recording this, I'm going back to my lab, even though it's currently like 6:45ish at night.
Oh goodness!
And I'm having coffee right now because I'm actually insane. So,
I mean,
we will have a whole episode dedicated to my master's thesis at some point in the future.
I believe we've been teasing that episode since episode 1.
I think we have too, and it will happen. I want to get it more complete than it currently is. It is currently at around 70 pages and about 15,000 words. So, and that's not including any figures or pictures or anything.
Yeah, so
it's going to be very long.
And I'm definitely looking forward to hearing about it once it's more fleshed out, and the just the tantalizingness of knowing that it's coming without actually being able to hear it is the anticipation is almost good enough.
Yeah, and it's like, I really could just boil it down to about a 2-minute spiel. And honestly, that's kind of how I prefer to talk about it, because I'm like, as much as I enjoy what I do, it's just so much stress at the current moment that I'm like, I just want it done.
And I don't think anybody would blame you for that, for getting it out of the way. And then once it's kind of in the past, it's a lot easier to talk about something like that once it's in the past than while it's actually happening. So that doesn't mean we don't have plenty to talk about today, including this episode's coming out on February 17th. So this week in science, Gavin, what do we have this week in science?
So I'm cheating a little bit in that this is coming from this coming Sunday, so it's technically next week. But the way the calendar that I read off of is set up is that Saturdays and Sundays are on the same page. So I'll be doing a little bit of a wombo combo today for Saturday and Sunday, the 20th and 21st.
And by the way, like is it ridiculous to anybody else that Sunday's the start of the week, even though it's part of the weekend?
Not according to this calendar, it's not. Apparently, it's the same as Saturday.
Well, I agree with that calendar. It is weird to me that we begin the week with Sunday.
I agree.
Anyways, what do we got?
In 2013, let's see. Yeah, so February 20th, 2013, neurological basis of human speech discovered. So not really paleontology related, but still, I'm a biologist. But it says,
so is it like where in the brain, or like what?
Let's find out.
Okay.
So researchers from the University of California, San Francisco, announced the discovery of the area of the brain responsible for speech motor control. Experts say that fully understanding the neurological mechanics of speech will help the development of computer-brain interfaces. Oh, Jesus. And in the treatment of speech disorders. Okay, that one's much better.
We have returned to AI.
This calendar loves AI. And like the reason why we started doing of the week, this week in science instead of like today in science, is because, more often than not, it would be something completely unrelated to this podcast if we just happened to do whatever was on that Wednesday. But more often than not, it was going to be something about like computers or AI. And don't get me wrong, I really like computers. I built my own desktop computer that, you're hearing me all from. And so, like, I like computers, but like the phrase "computer brain interface" horrifies me.
As it should. That's just hearing that it definitely horrifies me. Are we officially anti-AI on this podcast? Is that an official stance that we take? I'm not even sure
It
what I
depends.
think about it.
There's many different kinds of AI.
Right.
So
are we appropriately scared of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, we absolutely are tentatively scared of it.
We are both AI curious and AI terrified.
Anyway, so because we're doing the Wombo Combo, on February 21st, 2019, the headline is Bronze Age Humans Domesticated Foxes.
Ooh.
More our speed.
Yeah, correct. But now is there anything specific about that date that is relevant?
That's just when they found, or when the evidence got published.
Ah, okay. That makes way more sense. Yeah. So on that date in, I guess, 2 years ago, we have Bronze Age humans domesticate foxes.
So this is research from the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology provided evidence that peoples from the northeast Iberian Peninsula, which is the peninsula that like Spain and Portugal are on, domesticated foxes as well as dogs. Excavation of tombs in the area showed that masters were often buried with both animals, which are presumed to have been pets.
Oh, that's kind of adorable.
That is very adorable. And now, okay, I'm going to say this, and I don't actually mean it because I would not be able to appropriately care for a fox, but I low-key kind of want a fox.
Oh, absolutely. There's a bunch of little animals that I'm like, or even very, very large animals that I would love. Do you remember? And this is getting very far afield, but I am okay with it. When we were young, did you ever go on like Nick.com to play their Flash games?
Which one specifically? Because I didn't do Nick all that often. I did just all like the generic Flash games. I know I played a lot of like Bloons Tower Defense. I still play Bloons Tower Defense.
Absolutely,
I
love
Bloons Tower Defense.
100%. There was the Wild Thornberries had this game on Nick.com where you could like have like this whole wild animal playpen thing, and you couldn't put certain animals together because they'd get eaten. And I just remember they had these baby cheetahs that I thought were adorable, and I would just try and rescue as many baby cheetahs as I possibly could.
As you should. Cheetahs are not doing well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no. Well, realistically, it's sort of, I think we've talked about before with pandas, how pandas are just not good and would probably go extinct anyway. Cheetahs are kind of in the same boat in that they're just not the most competitive of animals.
Really, that is stunning considering they're, correct me if I'm wrong, the fastest land animal. Like
close, like they're very close, if not the fastest.
Depends on how you count, I guess.
Not quite, but it's like it's debatable whether like pronghorn antelope here in North America run faster. But yeah, it's like they're just like actual like kill completion percentage is really bad.
That's kind of stunning. I never would have thought that.
Yeah, no, they fail. I think it's about 50-50 to be honest. And I'm not like a cheetah expert by any means. But yeah, they're just not the most efficient of predators. They're not very strong. So it's like even when they do kill something, like a lot of times it'll get stolen from them because like they're real fast and they can catch a gazelle and kill a gazelle, but like if a lion comes up or a hyena comes up, what's it going to do?
I never would have considered that they were that kind of defenseless against other other animals of the jungle, at least the way I would think about it.
Well, none of those animals live in the jungle.
So. Okay, well, fair enough. I will accept your pedantry as accurate for this podcast. Anyways, we should probably get going on what we're talking about today, and hopefully today we are going to be kind of putting a nice little conclusion, or at least a conclusion for now, on our fieldwork series. This is going to be fieldwork part 3, and I assume that eventually, assuming this podcast goes on for long enough, that we'll be able to add to this series, because hopefully you'll be going out into the field eventually. But up to now, it looks like we are coming to the conclusion of the times that you've been out in the field.
Yeah, so we're picking up with my field work for basically that I've done just in grad school. So if you haven't heard any of our previous episodes about my field work, episodes 4 and episode 10, where I talk about some stuff that I did in undergrad, Make sure to go check those out. But now we're talking about stuff that I've basically just done in the last year and a half since fall 2019. And I'm super lucky in that, as I've said a bunch of times, that my undergrad school promoted fieldwork a lot, but also that now my graduate school does as well. So my first bit of fieldwork was actually something really interesting in a place that, like, I honestly, I'd always been like, I want to go there, but I never actually thought that I would. And that's Yellowstone National Park, which was incredible.
Ooh.
So I think it was
imagine.
I think it was the second weekend of classes. So I had been in, at this school in this state for less than 2 weeks at this point, or about 2 weeks. And I think, like, on the day before classes started, I was just, like, at the office, making sure that I had everything, make sure, setting up, like, my office space before that got taken away from me because of COVID. And I bumped into, like, our office secretary, or, like, department secretary, and she was like, "Oh, hey, you must be, so-and-so." I'm like, "Yep, that's me." And she was like, "Well, if you want to get to know people, the department's offering a trip to Yellowstone." And, she gave me the date.
Just casually offering a trip to Yellowstone.
Well, yeah, because it's, like, it's not terribly far away from where I currently live. It's about 8 hours away. Which out here, from Rapid City, South Dakota, is about as close as anything else, realistically.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
So, yeah. So, and I was like, "Well, how much is it?" And she was like, $20. I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah."
Okay,
she's like, "Yeah,
absurd.
it was $20 for the transportation there. We took, like, department vehicles, the food, and the camping. So, like, if we wanted extra stuff, like, obviously stuff at, like, the gift shop or anything, or we wanted to do, anything else that cost money at the park, which there really wasn't a lot of anyway, we had to pay for that. But, yeah, $20 got me 4 days in Yellowstone. And I'm like, I'm not going to complain about that.
Absolutely not. Now, were you a gift shop person? Were you eyeing the gift shop?
I absolutely was. So, okay, side tangent. One of my things that I love to collect, and I've collected these since I was a little kid, other than rocks, is those, like, souvenir pennies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Where you put the, like, the 2 quarters in, then your penny, and you, like, turn the thing and it, crushes your penny and puts an imprint on it. I have probably close to 40 different ones of those. Wow. I've got a pretty good collection from a lot of different states, like New York, Virginia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, California, Ohio, South Dakota, Wyoming. Many from lots of different stuff in Florida, because we went there for my senior trip in high school.
Right.
Yeah, so I've got a really big collection of those. So the entire time I'm like, okay, there's got to be one here. And of course I found it in the gift shop. But I also bought, most of my friends know I'm a very avid caffeine addict. So I bought like a bag of, like, Yellowstone coffee, which I'm sure, it's not like they grow it there. So I don't know what's different about it. I haven't drank any yet. It's still unopened. It's literally sitting on my bookshelf. So, what else did I get from there? Oh, I bought my niece a little, like, stuffed bison.
Aw.
Yeah, because she was about 4 months old at the time, I think. Yeah. But yep. So now that's just kind of hanging out in her room, and I see it whenever I go over to my sister's house when I'm, back home.
Was this the same niece that was watching Moana during one of our episodes?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
Yep. So I got her this little, cute stuffed bison, and then I got a couple things from my parents as well. But yes, I'm very much a gift shop person. But
very cool. So this is fall 2019 that you're in Yellowstone, and what's actually going on? So how long are you there for exactly?
So I was there for 4 days. So we left on a Thursday. So I guess, am I even remembering this correctly? See, this is what happens when I'm in, like, thesis brain mode, is that I can't think of anything else. So I know we missed at least one full day of classes. but I feel like
Okay.
which I didn't have class on Friday, so that means we must have left on a Thursday. Yeah, so we left on a Thursday, so we were there for all of Friday and Saturday, and then came back Sunday.
Okay, so this seems like an abbreviated stint out in the field as compared to some of your earlier work.
Oh, definitely. Like, this was much more of a tourist type thing, but the reason why I sort of consider it fieldwork is because we went with somebody from my school who's one of like the main people studying Old Faithful.
All right, so this was kind of a a shorter trip than you're used to for your previous field works, and I assume your subsequent field works. But what kind of work were you actually doing out there at Yellowstone? This sounds like it was a really cool opportunity. What exactly was the work you guys were doing?
So this was mostly like an educational trip. So we were going with Dr. Kevin Ward, one of our professors at my school, and he's one of the main people studying Old Faithful. He's like a geophysicist, so he studies like the physics behind, why they erupt, geysers and things like that, erupt water like they do, because we don't really, fully understand why they do some of these things. Uh, but that's sort of he was like our guide for the weekend, and it's really funny. So we actually ended up getting him from one of the gift shops like a little ranger badge, like junior ranger badge that you usually would get for kids, but we gave one to him, and he was pretty. He thought it was funny.
I was gonna ask, was he a good sport about that?
Yeah, he was a really good sport about it. But it was just really cool to be led around. Obviously, such like a really cool, like not just like natural environment, but like geological environment too, by like one of the world experts on it. So that
Does
was
that does
super
that
cool.
hit you as it's happening? Oh wow, like if I was to ask anybody on the planet about what's going on here, about what's happening, this is the guy. Like that's like that'd be one of those things I wouldn't think would hit me until, kind of after the fact, just realizing how lucky I was.
Kind of, yeah, because like, and granted, we sort of planned our days based on like what we wanted to do. Like there were a couple trips because like I said, it was like an educational type trip. It reminded me a lot of those geology 400 trips that I mentioned in the last one, where we would just sort of take the weekend trip based on what the professor did, and it sort of vary from professor to professor. So this reminded me very much of like one of those trips that would have been led by him if my current school had a class like that. um Obviously there was no like grade for it or anything, so we didn't have to turn in notes or anything, but um people could generally sort of do what they wanted, so I wasn't with him the whole time. But yeah, it was really really cool. And I guess maybe just like being a scientist, you're kind of around people who are like world experts in something kind of all the time. So it didn't hit me as much as it might some other people. uh
I guess that makes some amount of sense.
yeah. But
Now,
we did. Oh, go ahead.
no, well, I was gonna say, so this wasn't for a class. It wasn't like you were up against any kind of a deadline here. So was that sort of freeing in a way? Was it one of those things that it almost makes it harder to work when you don't quite have criteria? What was it like working, kind of without any sort of any definitive end goal in mind that somebody else was going to look at?
Not really, because it was basically. I kind of thought about it more like ecotourism than I did like a class. Like I did learn some things. I don't remember a lot of them at this point, so it's not like I really focused on committing them to memory. I was mostly there for the experience,
Gotcha.
which honestly is kind of how I think. Because as we talked about in episode 4, pretty much anybody can go out and do geologic field work. You know, so I kind of, you know, I didn't think about it this way at the time, but sort of looking back on it now, I kind of approached it like somebody doing like volunteer geological field work, where I'm just like, I'm here to learn, I'm here just to have fun and for the experience. Uh and obviously it was an incredible experience. I actually got to see a double rainbow, almost a triple rainbow. It was really cool. Yeah. Although I will say, It wasn't all super fun. So we were there, I think the first or second week in September. And
Okay.
every night that we were there, it got quite a bit below freezing.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. I would not. Is that normal for Yellowstone that time of year?
Yeah, just because it's so high in elevation.
You know what? I never. That makes way more sense. I
It's in
never
the
would have
Rocky
considered that.
Mountains,
Yeah. I
or
guess
at
that
least
that
at least on the outskirts of them.
right, but still the elevation. I never that just never crossed my mind. Like the elevation
Mhm.
there would make it. Would make it so cold that night. Now, was it hot during the days at all?
Oh yeah, it was warm enough to just be walking around in like pants and a t-shirt, like comfortably, you know. Um, Plus there was all like the geothermal hot springs around as well, so those
That probably helps.
were obviously quite warm. And then I was there. Like a big reason why I was really excited to go was the wildlife, just because uh, I had seen bison before, and they are bison, not buffalo. There's a difference.
We have clarified that part before.
We absolutely have, but I want to reiterate it. Um, and so I'd seen them before, but I had not seen really like wolves in the wild, and unfortunately, we didn't get to. Uh, they tend to be pretty, reclusive. They don't tend to just kind of hop out and let people see them. Um,
Hmm.
but I also really wanted to see a bear, which might
Now, do
sound
they
kind
have?
of dumb, but I wanted to see it.
Now, what kind of bears is it? Do they have grizzly bears over
Oh
there,
yeah,
or are they black
oh
bears?
yeah,
Okay, okay, so those are no joke.
from a respectable distance, of course.
I assume you weren't going to go up and pet one.
No, but so probably my favorite experience of the trip was some of us got to hike I believe it's the highest peak in the park, which is Mount Washburn, and it was really, hiking is one thing. I'm used to hiking. Hiking at that altitude is really different. You could tell. You
It
could.
really takes that much out of you.
Oh yeah, you could tell as you were climbing that the air was getting a little thin. Uh, just like you'd get more easily fatigued. You'd
Right.
have to stop for breaks more often. But you could definitely tell. Uh,
That's one of those wild things I almost want to experience that
mhm.
just to kind of know what that's like when the air around me is changing and the air around me is not what I'm used to. Like that's one of those things that's kind of wild and I don't think I would, internalize it until I actually experience it.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about it until it was already happening, and I was like, "Oh, okay, we're getting pretty up there." But the whole reason that I went on this, because this was an optional hike, um, because and they told, I think they had planned on it, but then they realized that like some specific trails are either closed or highly cautioned against hiking on them due to increased bear activity in the fall. Because before the bears hibernate, they want to pack on as much weight as they can,
Uh-huh.
and a nice human,
Yeah,
that's
some good red meat there.
that's some good meat. So fortunately, I mean, they weren't going to let us go if there was only going to be like three of us. So I think at least like 6 or 7 of us went, and we had at least two, maybe three cans of bear spray.
And my understanding of bears is that if you're traveling in groups of larger than about 4 or 5 people, they tend to leave you alone. Or
Yeah,
even if they do sort of poke their nose around, they're not too interested in going after a group of humans as opposed to one or two.
generally, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it varies from bear to bear, but
Of course, right.
so the obviously it was an incredible, it was a great hike. It was a great view once we got up there, because there was like an information center at the top, so you weren't just standing up there in the cold and the wind. Uh, so you could go inside and warm up a bit, but yeah, the main reason I went on the hike was because I wanted to see a bear. Unfortunately, it did not happen. Uh,
Well, still, it still sounds like it was a pretty successful trip overall, as short as it may have been.
oh yeah, it was incredible. Like if you ever get any form of a chance to go to Yellowstone, take it. It's not an easy place to get to, just because there's nothing else in Wyoming. Um, you'd probably have to fly into somewhere in Montana. Would probably be the quickest way to get there. Um, and I don't even know where that would be. There's probably an airport in Bozeman or Billings. That'd probably be your best bet. But if you have, a spare week, maybe a little longer, that you don't know what to do and you've got, a decent, enough money for a plane ticket, especially with the summer coming up. I don't know. Maybe take a trip to Yellowstone. It was really great.
I'm sensing a road trip this summer.
Not for me. I don't have money. Anywho,
well, we need some advertisers to come on here and start making this podcast a little more lucrative.
Ooh, yeah.
So we can do live recordings out in the field.
Ooh, that'd be neat.
That'd be wonderful. So, is there anything left to say on Yellowstone, or was this kind of a fun trip? If maybe less consequential for your formal academics, but quite a bit of fun and very memorable. Anything left to say on Yellowstone?
Not really.
Wonderful. Then I think we can move on here. So Yellowstone was in the fall of or I guess it was the summer, heading into grad school, correct? If it was September?
Well, I mean, it was like the first or second week of grad school.
Okay. So that was first or second week of grad school. So early on in grad school. Our next one, I see here Black Hills, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't know where that is. So where are we talking about? When is this happening? What's going on? Let's let's start here with our penultimate one.
So the Black Hills is a really neat geological area in western South Dakota, eastern Wyoming. And basically it's like technically part of the Rockies, but really quite separate because it's just completely isolated. It reminds me a lot of the Adirondack Mountains that you and I know pretty well. So it's basically just this isolated range of mountains that has some really neat geology to it, because sort of similar to the Adirondacks, it's got this spot in the middle, something that geologists call a pluton, which is basically just a big chunk of and it could be various chunks as well, but of igneous rocks that form deep underground and then get uplifted. It's generally what you find at like the center, at like the oldest parts of some mountains. Like the Adirondacks has a pluton as well, and then it's surrounded by sedimentary rocks. And so I got to explore the Black Hills quite a bit because I was teaching the lab part of our sedimentary geology and stratigraphy class. Also that same semester that I went to Yellowstone. So that was really interesting. But these were much more in the sort of 3-hour snippets that you get to do like during a normal lab during the semester.
Mm-hmm.
So didn't get to explore super far. But we did get to see lots of cool rocks, which was neat. And there's actually this really neat spot. Well, it's not just one spot. It's pretty much circles the entire Black Hills, but something that we call the Great Unconformity.
That's a great name.
So for the not geologically inclined, an unconformity is basically just a general term that we use when there's like a gap in time. So for example, say you have some rocks from the Cambrian at like roughly 500 million years ago, and then you don't, the layer of rocks right above that is, say, from the Cretaceous, only maybe 70 million years ago. That gap in time is called an unconformity. That can be from a variety of reasons, whether it's, there just wasn't a lot of deposition, so no rocks got deposited at that point. Could be due to erosion. That place that was underwater and deposited some sediments got uplifted, so it was then above the water. And
could it be aliens?
No. That's normally, as a scientist, I don't like just saying no.
I've never heard you be more disappointed in saying no before.
Yeah, I would be lying if I said there wasn't a twinge of disappointment in there. But yeah, so usually it's due to erosion. Sometimes it's due to just like a lack of deposition. This one, however, is called the Great Unconformity because there's a billion years of missing time.
That seems rather significant considering that the planet, correct me if I'm wrong, is only about 4 billion years old.
Yep. Well, like 4.5.
So, okay, so, somewhere between 20 to 25% of Earth's history is just missing, whereas I'm assuming that other unconformities are significantly smaller in just stature.
Yeah, so I don't know. Anything super old rock wise, like it's not like we have rocks from 4.6 billion years ago, which is when we think the Earth formed. We just don't, because
Hmm.
I mean the whole planet was molten, so like there weren't solid rocks to begin with. The oldest
Okay.
rocks that I'm aware of, I think, are in like the upper 3 billion years old. We might have some minerals, not quite rocks, but sometimes there's minerals called zircons that form and then get reworked and then become just like they're called. I'm not a petrologist, so some of these terms might not be right, but I think they're called like xenoliths or xenocrysts. But basically, it's like when there's a mineral from something else inside a rock of something else. So the rock that it's in might be like 3.7 billion years old, but the crystal inside it might be older.
Okay,
Um,
so we're kind of starting from a little bit sooner here, which actually almost makes it, even crazier if
oh yeah,
most of the rocks we're finding are, am I comfortable in kind of ballparking around the 3 billion year range is when a lot of our good records start existing?
no.
Okay.
I would say a lot of our good record, well, you could make an argument that our good record doesn't start until like 50 million years ago.
Okay. I'm trying to get a sense of like how, the
Yeah,
1 billion year unconformity, it seems
that is
rather
uncommon.
large. Right. Especially, and I'm trying to put that in the context of, how far back we have records that go and how big the typical unconformity is. That's kind of where I'm trying to place this in my head.
Off the top of my head, I would not feel comfortable giving like an average for like the average amount of time missing due to an unconformity, but
Okay.
a billion years. I mean, it's worthy enough of calling great.
They don't
So
just drop that on anything.
right. So it is a very significant unconformity, and I don't. I personally don't know of another one that's even close to that.
Gotcha. And so you guys were able to, this was reasonably close to where you're going to grad school, you said, right?
Yeah. So Rapid City, which is where I currently live, is just like at like sort of the base, like on the outskirts of the Black Hills. Um, so like I said, I was sort of teaching the sedimentary geology and stratigraphy class. So we sort of went around the hills because we weren't concerned with all that super old, plutonic stuff because that's all igneous metamorphic. We weren't really concerned with any of that. But
Gotcha. And just really quickly, I just want to make sure I understand this because I think I missed it earlier. You were teaching during this, right?
yeah, so I was the teaching assistant, which is very frequently how graduate students get paid. Um, we usually basically it works. So if you're in the sciences and wanting to go to grad school, this is important. So basically, you get a chunk or all of your tuition waived, and you get a paycheck for teaching a lab or doing research for the school.
That seems like a pretty decent gig.
Yeah. Um, for me, it's given me 3 semesters of teaching experience, which is awesome. Um, and I got to do field work, which is great too.
And with this specific field of work, again, I just want to make sure I understand this. So this was not I'm going out in the field for a week or for 5 weeks at a time. You said this was kind of going out there in kind of couple hour chunks over the course of a semester. Did I understand that correct?
Pretty much. I mean, with
Okay.
South Dakota, the weather is so unpredictable. We get it in at like the very beginning of the semester, so I think we went out for 5 of the first 6 weeks. So about 15-ish hours total,
Hmm.
and
That's so.
it was mostly just teaching the students how to take good field notes, how to do certain specific field practices actually in the field instead of just in the lab without a good you know the best way to learn is by doing. That's a lot of a lot of geologists just sort of their brains sort of work that way.
So your kind of goals here were significantly different, whereas in the past you were actually trying to do kind of field work and, collect data for yourself. Whereas this time it seems like your goals were more making sure that your students knew what they were doing. You were teaching the process instead of teaching the content or focusing on the content.
Exactly. And like I was definitely still doing that teaching of like the content and practices back like in the lab when we didn't go do field work. Uh, but yeah, when we were out in the field, this was mostly like, okay, here's how you do this, go do it, and try to do good at it. And it's kind of weird. I would prefer to have had that class taught in the spring semester instead of the fall, especially in a place with a significant winter, because then it's like you don't have time to learn proper like ways to describe rocks before you are sent outside to actually describe them. So it's kind of backwards in that way, in that we sent them out to take field notes before we taught them sort of how to take field notes.
And are we talking about freshmen here that you were teaching? Like who were the students in this case?
So this was mostly um, a good mixture of like sophomores, juniors, and a couple seniors. Definitely not
Okay.
freshmen.
Okay, I wanted to make sure. I want to know just how wet behind the ears we were
Right.
when it came to
Mm-hmm.
the kids that were going out there. And so, what was that experience like teaching? This is your first semester of grad school. You had been an RA before in college, but
Yep.
this is your first experience really, kind of on the other side of the desk. Your first experience actually teaching, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Mm-hmm. And
So, what was that like?
it was interesting. So um, I remember that semester I did not have class on Mondays, but that lab was on Monday.
Oh.
And so like literally the first day of the semester, I got given the keys to a 12 passenger van and we're like, all right, let's go. And I'm like, I drive a Chevy Cruze, excuse me. Uh, so,
It's amazing how much trust they give you right away.
oh, absolutely. And like, yes, I had to sign some paperwork, but uh, yeah.
Yeah, you had to sign some paperwork and that's it. That's what's
Oh yeah,
amazing.
no. The first time that I got behind that wheel, there was 11 students in my care, also in the van. So they really threw me to the wolves. But my teacher that I was with was fantastic. Generally he gave us like an outline of like what he wanted to cover in that lab, and then uh, me and I had a co-TA. We just sort of just went and we're like, okay, so this is what he wants them to learn about these kind of rocks today. We went to like the teaching collections that are separate from like our research collections. So we just went and picked out, okay, these rocks fit these descriptions. We want to teach them using these specimens, which was really nice because we sort of got to sort of gear it the way we wanted and know for ourselves. It made grading a lot easier because obviously we were the ones who sort of made the material, which was nice. Which is not always the case when you're a TA.
I can
Sometimes,
imagine.
yeah, sometimes they'll just give you the lab and be like, all right, run it. Other times you'll make the entire lab by yourself. And some teachers are much better than others about communicating what they actually want. So I got very lucky that my first teaching experience, I had a really great, like main teacher for that class.
And how were the students? Were they excited? Were they making like tons of mistakes about learning? Were they like what was, if you had to take your best guess, what was the student experience like during all this? Because this has got to be, I'm assuming this is their probably first or damn near close to first experience out in the field.
Yes and no. So some of them, I believe they do a little bit of field stuff for some of their like the freshman level geology classes, but I didn't TA for any of those classes and I didn't take them here, so I don't know. But it's interesting because it was a mix of geologists and geological engineers, which might seem like a little bit of a kind of pedantic distinction, but there is a major distinction there.
That's what we're all about here, pedantic distinctions.
Because like engineers and people more in the brain with like a brain more geared toward like research science are very different people. And you and I might have lots of engineer friends.
Yes,
they
we do.
they're very much like task oriented, very like sort of focused. And honestly, this might not quite seem to track with some of our engineer friends, but at least I found that the engineers were way more neat. And
I'm gonna mute myself and continue laughing at that, just given who our friends are.
yeah,
But but yeah, I wouldn't say our engineer friends, the few that we have in common, are the neatest. Although I will say, my senior year in college, I did live with somebody who was
hmm
getting an engineering degree, and he handled all of our money, and he had spreadsheets and everything. So I suppose that actually tracks
yeah, like
kind of more broadly outside of our small friend group.
yeah. But yeah, like everything that the engineers did was way more neat, whereas some of the geologists seem to have more detailed notes, it seemed. So it
Mm.
was a really interesting mix. And as a geological engineer, I think you do, I mean, this I'm sure varies widely, uh, but I think you do more field work and like rock description type things as a researcher as you do as like an engineer. So I think the geology students had at least some kind of experience doing that kind of thing in the field, like field data collection, whereas the engineers I don't think did, or at least not as much. So it was really interesting to sort of experience that dichotomy because my undergrad school didn't have, I don't even think we had like a regular engineering program, let alone a geological engineering program. So it was really interesting.
That really sounds like a whole lot of fun. And this was just one semester. This didn't continue beyond that first semester of grad school.
So that class, yes, that was just that one semester for this current semester and last semester. So that'd be fall 2020, spring 2021. I've been TAing for a surveying class, which I think I've talked a little bit about before, but it's like with the scopes and on the tripods that you see people next to the road doing. That's surveying. That's currently what I TA.
And that
And
is, the times you indicated are, pretty rosy and peachy for the rest of the world, fall 2020 into spring 2021. How do how is, the state of the world and the pandemic specifically, I suppose, how is that affecting those classes?
so there's a lot of caveats to that because I live in South Dakota and South Dakota has no rules. Um,
So I believe was it like 1 in 500 people has gotten COVID or died of COVID or something? Did I see something along
I
those
don't
lines?
know. I just know
Okay.
that we've never had a mask mandate and we've never had a statewide stay-at-home order at like even back like in March 2020.
When the whole world was
Um,
falling apart.
right, yeah, they just didn't. They just chose the path of doing nothing. Um, but I'm fortunate that my school, being an all STEM school, uh, you know, all science school, uh, has handled it very well. Some of the
Oh, that
students might not have, but the school administration itself has handled everything really well.
well, I mean, that's, cold comfort, but at least there is some governing body that is, taking
hmm
things seriously around for you. And so, how specifically has it affected these classes that you are, ostensibly, I was going to say in charge of, I guess that might not be the correct word, but, you
Yeah,
have
no.
some sort of authority in.
Uh, Honestly, other than having less people in each class, and we didn't even have that many people in each class. Between the two semesters. Last semester, I think we had 16 in my class, and then this semester we have 8. Um, but other than that, it really hasn't affected it because it's nice and it's 2 days a week. And so what he did last semester was I would have 8 outside with me doing things around like the quad. We set up like a course for them to survey. Um, and I would be dealing with half the group outside, and he'd have the other group, like the main teacher, would have the other group inside doing like a lecture and working on homework and things. So it was nice to split it up that way, and then they just switched on whatever day, the other day of the week. It was a Tuesday Thursday class.
That seems like a pretty good, way to, split the baby here. Just try and make sure that you can still do the work while doing it safely.
Yeah, and it was, I think some like administrative officials, just as they were walking from building to building, kind of gave us, you know, I think they might have sent an email to I don't remember exactly who they sent it to, but they're all working in groups of I think two or three. Maybe there was a group. I think there was one group of four last semester, but so they're all working on the same piece of equipment, right? So it's like you can only be so distant while you're all trying to look at the same piece of equipment and learn from it, you know?
Right.
And if it was inside, I would 100% agree, but it's like we're outside, we're all still wearing masks, Um, and I always have like a little package of like alcohol wipes to wipe stuff down. So we were being, I thought, properly precautious, but some of the administrative officials did not think so.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, we didn't get in trouble or anything, but uh,
My exasperated side notwithstanding, it is, I would gladly take, people that are going to choose to take the pandemic seriously than the other
yeah,
way around,
absolutely.
even if that can be frustrating at times. I do want to make sure that that is where at least my priorities lie.
Yeah, I agree. And it's fortunate that like this class mainly is a field class because it's you can't really learn how to do surveying in a building just because you need to set up like a course for it. And generally that's I think our course is a little over an acre. So it's like we need some space.
Right.
And uh you can't teach these techniques inside and then not have them also practice it outside because when they get to a job site and this class is mainly for those geological engineers and some mining engineers. um when they get to a job site in their career and their employers like, all right, I'm giving you this job for today, go survey whatever. And they're like, oh, I only surveyed inside. That's going to look A, really poorly on that person, and B, really poorly on our school.
Right. So there's, you need to find ways to be able to get these kids outside and doing real work.
Exactly.
So I just took a quick look. The Washington Post. We were talking earlier about South Dakota's numbers.
Right.
By February, the numbers show that 1 out of 8 residents had been infected with COVID-19, and 1 out of 500 residents had died from it. So when you were saying that South Dakota has not done a great job, that was an understatement, and I think that's a credit to your school and the actions of you and other individuals to to take this seriously, to be able to still go out in the field and do the hard work that needs to be done while also doing so safely in an environment that really isn't all that conducive to the kind of safety that's required here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very fortunate that I go where I do.
Absolutely. And so I believe that's going to close the book on your Black Hills teaching experience, unless there's anything else to throw in, or are we heading to the last fieldwork experience so far?
I'll throw one more thing in. So, I don't know if we're still doing it at the end of this semester, but at least at the end of last semester, we actually took the students to an old mine. Uh, I'm,
Ooh,
I'm trying to think of what the mine was for. It wasn't like a
I
gold
was
mine, I
was
don't
it
think.
coal?
No, there's not really much coal around the Black Hills, but and it was well, most coal mining's typically done with pit mining, so like surface mining. This was like a true, tunnel into a rocky hillside type mine. Um,
Wow.
so that was really cool. I had never personally been to a mine like that. I'd been to several like open pit mines, uh, but we actually had to go in the weekend before we took the students there and test like its oxygen levels. And we went in with just like a big metal stick and started just sort of poking at the ceiling. And I was there with like somebody who is like a mining engineer with like 20 plus years experience of like working in mines. So like if he's doing it, I'm confident that like it's safe and we're not gonna die. But as
But
he's
still,
just
that's
like,
a little nerve-wracking.
yeah, as he's just jabbing the ceiling with this big metal stick in when we're all inside the mine, I was a little nervous, But anyway, interesting experience that was for me and the students. So I was just as interested as the students were in that case.
I can only imagine what that must be like, where you need to go test the oxygen. I'm just trying to think of how comfortable I would be if I were in your shoes.
And like,
but yeah, go ahead.
It wasn't all that low. I think it was maybe 2% lower, like at the farthest end of the mine.
Which is
like,
notable, but not like you're not gonna die walking in there.
I honestly didn't even notice it.
Okay. It was worse when you were climbing up Yellowstone.
Yes, it definitely was.
Okay. So I think that closes the book on the Black Hills, and that brings us to the Missouri River. And so at this point, we have to be talking about something that's happening during COVID, correct?
It sure was.
Oh boy! So let's hear about this one at the Missouri River. This is in our notes, by the way. Do you want to read what you have written down in our notes here? Because this is a wonderful reference.
It would be my pleasure, Mike. So this bullet says Missouri River, semicolon, Field Camp 2, Venomous Boogaloo. So this was my master's field camp. And like I mentioned last episode, pretty much every undergraduate geology degree requires a field camp. Many geology master's programs do not. But mine does. And so I was really lucky just because, doing more field work in more places is fun and different experiences. So this was along the Missouri River in sort of like central South Dakota. So we have sort of like a standing contract, and like it needs to be renewed every year, but I don't think it's ever not been renewed. But we have a contract with the Army Corps of Engineers, who
Ooh.
I didn't know this, but technically owns like a certain like radius on the banks of pretty much every river, at least big rivers.
Really?
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
I had never known that. And I live on the St. Lawrence River, which is one of the largest shipping channels in the world. I never knew that. So that was interesting to me. And so we have a contract with them to survey, a certain length of the river for fossils every summer. And so my field camp was only 2 weeks, but I got asked if I wanted to be a TA for, there's 2-week sessions. I was doing the second 2-week session. So I TA'd it for 2 weeks before my session started. And then I technically was also a TA for my second 2-week session, even though I was also a student, which was a little weird, but I still got paid. So whatever. But yeah, so this was really interesting because, as I mentioned last episode, in my undergraduate field camp, we had like a field station with like bunkhouses and like a full-size kitchen, or like industrial kitchen, and like a main room where we ate and did work. No, we didn't have that here. It was up to us to find our own lodging.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and granted, we were based out of a town, so like it wasn't hard. But I personally cannot afford to stay at a hotel for a month straight. I don't know about you.
My question.
Yeah, so I stayed at a campground and in a tent for, and like granted we had weekends off, so I would leave that town, and it was only about 3 hours away from my apartment, here in Rapid City. So we had half days on Fridays, so I was usually back here by like 5 or 6 p.m. usually before that, but on Friday, and then I would get back to my campsite like Sunday afternoon sometime.
Gotcha. And so this is the equivalent of, you've jacked the prices up so high that I'm just going to go stay somewhere for free,
Well, so no, I did still have to pay.
Oh, really? At the campsite?
It was a campground.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking that you're just out in the woods, mountain man here. But okay, so this is maybe a half a step up from that.
So there was a place where you could do that. However, I don't even think there was bathrooms. There certainly wasn't showers at that place.
Okay.
So it's like, I'm also not going to go, anytime you're doing even multi-day long field trips or field work, there's a general sort of like cleanliness in general goes down.
Yes.
Just because you're all doing it, you know, you're all doing field work, you're all getting sweaty, you're all being dirty, playing with rocks, you know, so
you're not offending anybody with your stench.
Right. But not showering at all for the entire week would have been horrible because, it's South Dakota in summer. It's real hot. So real sweaty. Mm-hmm. And also, because we're literally on the banks of this river, it was quite humid just because there was a lot of water evaporating from the river. So we were real sweaty and real gross and real dirty from being on these rocks all day. So by the time Friday would have rolled around without any showers, I would have been absolutely disgusting, and I was not here for that. So, at least if I could avoid it. So I actually got kind of lucky. So I stayed at a campground, and because I was staying for so long, they actually gave me like a discounted rate, which was very nice of them. Really? They didn't have to do that.
Well, that's the kind of customer service that you love to hear. That
exactly.
Especially at a campground like that, when I'm assuming that they're not exactly making millions of dollars.
Well, it was during. You might have heard of this or seen me post on Facebook about it, but this was during that big biker rally that happens every year in South Dakota.
I think I heard something this year about that.
Yeah, so even with COVID, it still happened.
Of course it did.
There were far fewer people than usual, but there was still about 250,000 extra people in South Dakota for it, compared to
God.
Much closer to 1 million, like usually like around 700,000-ish. So a lot of them stop in that general area because it's about 4.5 hours from the actual like location of the rally. So sometimes a lot of them stayed as they were going to or from, the place. Because if they wanted to get there relatively early on like the first day of it, they would stay somewhere around, where we were at. So
did you bring your motorcycle?
I sure did not. I do not have a motorcycle. as that might surprise some people. I don't know. But
I don't know. You really strike me, especially now with the bald beard look. You really strike me as a motorcycle kind of guy.
No thanks. I like my skull where it is.
Fair enough. So that's kind of the logistics, I think, of a lot of it. What was the actual? What were you kind of again going back to kind of the central question of I think all of these kind of field trip exercises or field work exercises is what were you actually doing there? What was the goal? Was this required for? You said this was required for school for your grad program, which is kind of if not unique to your grad program, at least rare amongst similar grad programs. So what was actually going on at this Field Camp 2 Venomous Boogaloo?
So the first 2-week session, so it was me, my advisor, our preparator, who's the person that once we bring a fossil back, she's the person who takes it out of the rock and makes it good enough for the research scientists to actually study. Super, super important person to have with you in the field because they're the person who has to deal with it when you bring it back. So
right.
So it was the 3 of us, and then we had 2 undergrad students. One from, I think, University of Cincinnati, and then one from a small university in Texas that I had not heard of and don't remember. So it was just the 5 of us. And we literally would meet at, because I don't know if the Army Corps of Engineers paid for it or if the school paid for it, but the 2 like full staff members stayed in a hotel. So we would meet at their hotel at, I think, 8:15 every morning.
That's not too terrible.
No, that's not terrible at all. So then we would, because we were on the river, we had a boat. It was just like a flat bottom aluminum boat. And her name was Victoria's Secret.
The name of the boat was Victoria's Secret?
The name of the boat was Victoria's Secret because
that's adorable.
She would get very hot in the blazing South Dakota sun. That's why. Because she's hot. I didn't name it. Apparently that's been the name for quite a long time, but that was her name. So we would go get Vicky, as we called her.
I'm sorry.
But yep, so we
you
had,
keep doing I'm gonna mute myself. You do your thing.
Okay. We had a Suburban that belonged to the school. We would go pick up Vicky because we stored her at like the Army Corps of Engineers office in the town, and we'd go, find a boat launch close to wherever we were going to work that day. We'd, get Vicky unhitched and off the trailer, and then we'd, usually by about 9:30ish, we were, at our first site. So basically what that consisted of once we were actually at the spot.
And were you going to the same place every day, or was this kind of you were going to a new place every day?
Yep. So the way the Missouri River around that area works is there's really big cliffs and then sort of valleys between them where, like, when it rains, the water would run off through these little valleys into the river. So we would be checking out these little valleys because that's where all the erosion was happening. So we would get to a spot, we'd just sort of grab the anchors and the ropes, just sort of yank Vicky up onto the shore and make sure she wasn't going to go anywhere. And then we would just sort of start scouring the ground for fossils. And it's exactly what it sounds like. We just kind of walked around. We were told and shown, what kind of things to look for, especially because I had never been on like a full, like, specifically just looking for fossils field work before. This was sort of my first experience with it, especially with vertebrates.
Oh, wow.
Invertebrates.
I would have guessed that.
Well, yeah, because I hadn't done any. Some people will get like an internship or some kind of volunteer stuff in undergrad. In the Northeast, that's really hard to come by because vertebrate fossils just kind of don't exist in the Northeast.
Right.
Our rocks, we've talked about this. The rocks just aren't the right age for it, really. I mean, I've done it with like invertebrates before, but it's like if you've seen one shell, you've seen most of them.
Okay.
But, and like, again, I'm not meaning to offend any invertebrate people, but sorry. But with vertebrates...
But you're not taking it back.
I'm not taking it back at all. With vertebrates, it varies so much by the host rock. So we're working with two formations, and one of them has several members, so like subdivisions of that formation. So both were sort of mid to late Cretaceous, but they were marine sediments. So they were from the Western Interior Seaway, which I think we've talked about before. So this big ocean that sort of cut North America in half, sort of north to south during the Cretaceous period. So in one of the formations, it's like a sort of a gray chalk almost, and the fossils are black. Super easy to find fossils there.
Okay, that makes your job a little bit easier.
Right, but then the one above it is a black shale, and most of the fossils in that are sort of corroded by gypsum and are either kind of blackish or sort of like a maroonish color. So either way, both quite dark against like a dark rock, so much harder. And yeah, so those are the main two. So for the first 2 weeks, it was mostly me helping teach the undergraduate students how to take good field notes, how to properly think about, what do these fossils tell us about the environment? What do the rocks tell us about the environment? Because, we told them that this is Western Interior Seaway, but it's like, but you might not always know that going into it, And then also just sort of asking or teaching them about grad school and like what to expect from grad school. So, and mostly just being there as like extra support for my teachers, mostly just like I hesitate to say this about myself, but like the muscle.
Okay.
Because it was usually me who was like pulling the boat onto the shore.
Right.
And
so
usually
it's
pushing the boat back
both have
into the
somebody
water.
it's helpful to have somebody that both knows what they're doing and is young enough to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's basically it. We would just sort of get up, put the boat in the water, go to our spot. We'd be at each spot for about, it depended on how much area there was to cover at that spot, but like maybe half an hour. Put the boat, push the boat back into the water, move literally just like a couple yards down shore to the next one. And just do that until about 4 is when we started to head back because we wanted to have like the boat in by about 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that for the first 2 weeks, and then the undergrads went home, and then when I was a student, my office mate Grace was also there, so it was just the 2 teachers and then the 2 students.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, well, I mean, Vicky is not a big boat, so
I guess that makes sense. Yeah,
Vicky can only
but I mean,
fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. So
okay. So I mean, I imagine that you guys all got to know each other quite well over the course of you said it was 2 weeks.
yeah,
Was it an enjoyable experience spending that much time with everybody there, or should I edit this question out of the podcast?
no, it's fine. One of the undergrad students in particular, I was not all that fond of.
On
But I mean, I liked hanging out with my advisor and our preparator. They're fun people to be around. But yeah,
Gotcha. So
uh,
that's cool. And is
yeah,
there, or I guess it's somewhat cool depending on what was going on. It sounds like it was still a net positive experience overall.
absolutely.
Um,
So the big downside was this did have some restrictions because of COVID.
mhm,
Um, obviously, anytime we were in the Suburban, because we all rode in the Suburban together. When we went to pick up Vicky and then also to drop off Vicky at wherever we were, whatever boat launch we were using that day. So we wore masks when we were in the Suburban, obviously. And it's actually funny. Grace and I made a lot of jokes because Grace and I live together. So it's like, do we really need to? But
yeah, right, yeah.
uh, and then we also wore the mask when we were in the boat, just because we had to be relatively close to each other. But this year we were supposed to do some actual like excavation. We didn't collect all that much for a couple of reasons. The main one, that reason that we didn't like collect all that much was because a lot of it just wasn't worthy of collecting, because it could have been like a fish jaw. Fish individual just isolated fish jaws were by far the most common things that we came across, other than like
Hmm.
single vertebra, which like you can't even tell anything from it. Fish jaws you usually can tell at least like the genus from of it sometimes. Um,
Hmm.
but it's like we've got 40 of these back in the lab. We don't need this. Um, so, but we were supposed to excavate something. There are certain details that like I think technically, as long as I don't give like anywhere near a location, it's probably fine. But just for
Ooh.
safety's sake, I'm just not going to specify too much. We were supposed to excavate a nearly complete thing. And
A nearly complete thing. That is a great job of being tantalizing while giving no specifics whatsoever.
right, and I will say it is a marine vertebrate
Okay, now
from
we're getting
the
somewhere.
Cretaceous. Um, a fairly large thing, roughly person sized. Um, Anywho, we were supposed to excavate that, but we didn't, because in order to do that, you need to get rather close to each other, and they just didn't allow that. So we went to check on it, make sure that it was still there, and make sure that if we needed to patch it up anywhere, we brought some tools and like different glues that we use in paleontology to do that. But we didn't end up taking it out of the ground. I really hope that they do get to this year, because they found it at like the very end of the 2019 field season, but it was so late in the field season that they didn't have time to actually excavate it. So they plan on doing it this year, but then COVID. So hopefully in this coming year, the 2021 field season, they get to. I really hope they do. Uh,
Obviously, the delays suck and they are what they are. But I'm glad that people are kind of being diligent about not rushing things just for the sake of rushing them, or not skirting on protocols because they're inconvenient. People are following the rules, which is good. You said it was a marine vertebrate about human sized. Talking like
Yes.
a mermaid here?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll
I mean,
take
that'd
that.
be a pretty great thing to get your hands on.
Well, the tricky thing with like excavating anything relatively large is that we got to put it in the boat as well.
Oh, I never would have thought about that. Okay.
So, and I asked them, like, so what would we have done if we could have excavated this? And they were like, well, one of you would have had to stay, and we'd come back to get you at some point. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Just so we're all on the same page,
Yeah, just so that we all know what we're signing ourselves up for here.
Right. Because it's
So,
like, well, because they were like, we need 3 people in the boat to get it docked, because we need the person driving, and then 1 person at like the front and the back in order to get the ropes on right. You probably could do it with only 2, like the driver and 1 other person, but they were like, we want 3 people, and there's really not space for 4 people and the fossil, so somebody would have had to stay. But we did find, and it really is a shame that we couldn't, because in paleontology, like fossils are destroyed literally every day due to just like nature, and we had it covered up. We put like a piece of like a tarp over top of it, and then basically reburied the tarp. So it's like it's really hard to find. So if poachers, which is another real significant thing, which is why I'm not really giving all that many details, fossil poaching is a massive, massive industry that many people don't even know exists,
including me.
Yeah. So
that's a new episode idea.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of crazy stories, including one about Nicolas Cage.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we can talk about that eventually.
Okay.
But yeah, between just nature, fossil poaching, or even just like people somehow, I mean, this one would be very hard to destroy by accident because it's really out of the way. But that can happen too. And so literally any time that you don't excavate a fossil that is worthy of excavation is really, really dangerous for that specimen. So it really is a shame that we didn't get to excavate that one.
It is. Are you going to be part of the team that goes back next year and tries to do it?
Unfortunately, no. Just because we have a lot of new grad students this year, and there probably just won't be room for me in the boat. And also, I won't be a student here anymore, ideally. So
I guess
nothing
that makes
against
sense.
here, but I'm planning to finish my master's this semester. So
all good things eventually come to an end. So I think that kind of ends.
Well, I would like to.
Oh, there's more.
Before we wrap it up, I would like to, just because we did say that this one was called Field Camp 2 Venomous Boogaloo. We haven't talked about.
Oh, that's right. But by all means, please.
So a substantial portion of things that we ended up talking about were the various animal encounters that we had during this field season. So as you might imagine, because it's South Dakota, there are lots of ranches around, right? So I'll get to the venom stuff in a minute. But a lot of ranchers are the Army Corps of Engineers lets a lot of ranchers just sort of let their cattle go into the river. They're not going to go super out deep into the river. They'll sort of just stay, it's basically just so they can drink. And apparently some of them had put out their bulls relatively late this year. So we had at least like 4 or 5 like significant bull scares. And
really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. So there was the most notable one was we had just gotten to a spot, and my advisor, so the main person on the trip, was sitting, because anytime we got to a new spot, we took notes about like the location of the spot, what spot number that was for that day, the time, what formations you were going to be working in, just general notes. So he was sitting just sort of on the ground next to the boat, doing this. And so the rest of us were sort of more away from the boat taking our notes. And we look up and there's a cow that we thought was just a cow, not a bull. And
Right.
it was walking it came around like a corner and was walking sort of slowly toward Darren, my advisor. And we were like, "Hey, Darren." He's like, "Yeah, what's up?" It was like, there's a cow right there, and he's like,
This is like out of a movie.
Well, it gets worse. So he looks, and he was sort of looking at it from the front, so it was kind of tough to tell. And he was like, it's just a cow, it's fine. And but he's also nearly blind. So yeah, it kept getting a little closer, and then I got like a decent like side view of it and saw that it was very much not a cow. And we were like, "Darren," and he's like, "What?" Like kind of annoyed. He's like, "I'm taking my notes," and we're like, "Darren, get in the boat." And he's like, "What?" And he looks, and it's staring at him and was kind of pawing the ground a bit.
This is like a movie. Oh my gosh.
Yep. So he gets in the boat slowly, and then the bull just kind of goes on its way. We all moved. The rest of us moved, so that there was like a big dead tree between us and the bull. But Darren was probably not more than 25 to 30 feet from it.
Good God.
Yeah. Oh and God. Most people have seen cows, but like I just did not realize how incredibly jacked bulls are.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen, a bull or I think a cow, up close. And I imagine it's one of those things where you see it up close and you're like, oh, I get it now.
Well, so I had seen cows up close before, but like not really bulls. I'd seen some steers up close before too. But like I don't know if it's just like them not being castrated just makes them way more ripped. But like you could visibly see like the muscles ripple under its skin as it walked, like unbelievably jacked animal.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this was Field Camp 2 Venomous Boogaloo. I don't believe that bulls are venomous, so I assume that this would be a good story in and of itself, but I believe there's more to the story if I were to guess.
Yeah, so honestly, the bulls were more exciting because frankly they're kind of more dangerous than so there's one species of venomous snake that lives in South Dakota, and it's the prairie rattlesnake. But prairie rattlesnakes are known to be rather docile, which is
that's comforting.
Well, which is and isn't, because they're pretty hesitant to strike, but they're also pretty hesitant to rattle, which means if you are near one, it might not let you know. So the whole genesis of this podcast was me posting a picture of a rattlesnake on Facebook. So this was one day we were out on this hot outcrop that had some like little caves sort of in it toward the top. And I was just kind of climbing around on it, was going to put my hand there to, give myself a little extra leverage to pull myself further up the outcrop. And good thing I looked before I did, because there was probably like a 4 to 5 foot rattlesnake. This was a really big snake. And like, I like snakes. If it's a non-venomous snake, I would not I might hesitate, but I would be more than happy to just go pick up, even like a bull snake, which are very angry snakes. They're not venomous, but they just are generally not the nicest of snakes.
Right.
But I would not hesitate to go pick that up. So I like snakes a lot. However, being like, I don't know, 2 seconds away from putting your hand on a 4-foot rattlesnake, that was a bit scary. So that was the first one we saw.
And just how, like, when we're saying these are venomous, like, let's say you get bit, what, like, do we have odds or percentages here? Like, what,
so
what's the worst case scenario?
Prairie rattlesnakes are not, like, incredibly venomous. It'd put me in the hospital for sure.
Okay.
But the biggest danger is, like, if you got bit by a rattlesnake, and then could get to a hospital within 20 to 30 minutes, you'd pretty much be fine. You'd probably lose some function of your hand for a little bit, but it would probably come back in a reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But they sort of put this in perspective on like our first day of this field camp, because we had like a sort of safety briefing before we actually went out and did anything. So we're like, even if you can see town from wherever we're at, we're probably at least 2 hours away from getting you to a hospital, because we got to get in the boat. We gotta push the boat off from the shore. We gotta dock the boat. We gotta pull. Well, at that point, if somebody got bit by a snake, we probably might not pull the boat out of the water. We probably just would take off.
Right.
But it's like we're a solid 40 minutes by boat to the boat launch, and then probably another solid 40 minutes to town.
So it's like you were not getting the immediate care that you would need for a snake that should be, in the context of venomous snakes, reasonably treatable, but you are not getting the immediate treatment that would need.
Exactly. So they were like, if you got bit on the hand, there's a really solid chance that you might never get full function of your hand back. So, on that happy thought, go do field work. So that was the first one that I saw, but not the most dangerous one that I saw. So, this was on, I think it was a Thursday. I think Darren had like a meeting to attend, so we didn't do any boat stuff that day. We just went to some places that we could get to without the boat. And it was a little drizzly, really kind of overcast, just really dreary day. It was right before lunchtime, so all of us were kind of like tired, not paying as good of attention as I should have anyway. And I was just kind of walking along this beach. And there were these two big actually, I think 3 big slabs of rock at about hip level or so on my right. So I had my rock hammer in my hand and was just sort of tapping the rocks with my hammer as I was walking by them, not thinking anything of it. And in the cracks between the second and third rock, and these are roughly like table-sized slabs of rock, I walk by it and sort of notice out of the corner of my eye something in there. So I walk by it and then sort of like look back, and there's just a rattlesnake there less than like 2 feet from me. Under these rocks that I was just hitting with my hammer. And I'm like, ugh. I literally just like froze and like slowly backed away. This one was a much smaller snake than the first one. But that's also not necessarily a good thing, because adult snakes generally don't want to inject their venom into you, because it's not for you, it's for their food. So, but smaller snakes don't necessarily have that kind of control. So if you get bit by a big snake, yeah, you might get a larger, quantity of venom, but they also have the option to not actually inject you with the venom, whereas the smaller, younger snakes might not have that control. So a smaller snake bite can be even more dangerous than like a big snake bite. So I just slowly backed away and went and told the rest of the group, I'm like, okay, don't go over there. There's a snake over there. And we couldn't really get to the rest of the outcrop without walking past that. So we're like, well, I guess we're done here for the day. Those were 2 like significant rattlesnake encounters. But like I said, the bulls were probably realistically more dangerous than the snakes were. But rattlesnakes are a lot more fun to talk about.
I just realized my mic was muted for some reason. I had a couple things I was going to say. But just given the kind of work that you're doing, and what the amount of time you're going to be out in the field, do you expect to at one time, be bitten by a rattlesnake, or to have some sort of a violent encounter with a bear or a bull? Like, is that just kind of an occupational hazard that you're anticipating, or would that be kind of extraordinary, even given the kind of work that you're doing?
So you're asking me if I expect to be bitten by a rattlesnake at some point in my life.
Not, I mean, so bitten by a rattlesnake might be a bit excessive, but like, do you like, these kind of, we've talked just even on this episode of a number of hazards just with wildlife. You were hoping to run into a grizzly bear in Yellowstone. We had, some bulls and snakes here. Like, eventually, do you expect to have, a less than pleasant encounter with one of these animals, or is that not expected, even given the kind of work that you're doing?
I'd say generally not. Like by far, the biggest risk of doing field work is either traffic accidents, like that's probably like the biggest like cause of like death or even serious injury associated with field work. But more likely is like dehydration, heat stroke. Those are things that I would be much more concerned about than like dealing with an animal.
Okay, gotcha. Because just the sheer volume of different animals that could, that could seriously hurt you that we talked about even only on this episode, is kind of mind blowing. So, but I'm glad that that's, as long as you take the proper precautions, a lot less of a worry than I might have originally thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I believe we are significantly over time, but I believe that kind of wraps it up. I do have one final question for you. If
Yeah.
you want to just quickly answer it, is kind of what's next. So we've kind of gone through your main field work so far in these 3 episodes. What do you have any guesses as to what's next? Do you have anything that you would like to do? What can we expect in episode 4 of the series, or part 4 of the
So
series, I should say?
I have one other fieldwork experience, but it's quite recent and it's like not as big. But I did some like private consulting for uh, a
Big
couple
shout over
that.
here.
Well, so there was this couple that came into the museum on campus and was asking, for like a grad student or somebody to come, show them around their ranch, because they said that they had some interesting like rock formations on their ranch that they wanted to, they were just curious about. And I was like, I mean, sure. Are they going to pay? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm down. Um,
Yep, you're in.
yeah. So I went and it was really neat. They're a really nice couple. But like, not much to write home about. They had some really interesting rocks that I told them about. Um, but we didn't like collect anything. We didn't try and dig out anything. Uh, but so that happened. I could see myself doing that more in the future. The jobs that I'm currently applying for, a couple of them are like community college teaching positions, and in their job descriptions, basically said that like be prepared to teach classes that require field trips, and I'm like, cool, right up my alley.
Yeah, yeah, you're in.
And be able to like plan those field trips, which would be a new experience for me, so I'd be really happy to do that. I also applied for some museum jobs, which realistically probably have less field work associated with them. But most museums, especially some that are like relatively well funded, uh, do have like each summer have like field expeditions to go out and try and collect some new stuff. So I'd love to like volunteer to go, or even better if they could pay me to go. That'd be cool.
Yes.
But for in the future, it'd be just like sort of some of this in this episode has been, but like work affiliated instead of like in my own free time.
Right, right, right. Well, that sounds like it could be for some diverging paths in the future, but definitely something that hopefully we'll get to talk about eventually. Particularly if you went to go work at a museum, well, there might be less field work. I think that there would be quite a bit of content just to work with from there.
That depends because like some museums are very particular about revealing things about like their internal workings and stuff like that. So that would greatly depend on the museum, but
Well, if you could pick one of the cool ones, I'd appreciate it.
I'll try my best.
Very nice. So, my name is Mike. That is Gavin. This concludes, at least for now, our series on Gavin's fieldwork. Gavin, thank you so much for sharing that with all of us.
Absolutely, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Take care, everybody.